Today we have a revamp of an old written review that I did for GamesNosh.com back in the day. This was written around the time that Mother 4 was supposed to be released, so I was on the lookout for games similar to Mother, and Boot Hill Heroes was one that really caught my eye, so I've just finished revisiting it. I've expanded the review a little bit, and now I'm here bringing it to you in video format, so let's get into it. Boot Hill Heroes is the first game from indie studio Experimental Gamer, a developer which aims to bring elements from classic RPGs such as Final Fantasy and Chrono Trigger and breathe life into the genre once again. This very small team had a successful Kickstarter campaign in late 2012, and Boot Hill Heroes was released on Steam and Xbox Live Arcade in October and December of 2014 respectively. It originally caught my eye because of its striking resemblance to Earthbound, and I thought it would be the perfect game to play in the run-up to the release of Mother 4. Well, why don't we ask Ness here what he thinks? Ness, raise your hand if you think this looks similar to Earthbound. On the other hand, Boot Hill Heroes does use an overlooked setting for an RPG, the American Wild West of the 19th century. The story is that of a young boy named Kid, the son of a sheriff who scattered a notorious gang and forced them into hiding. After 10 years, the return of the gang has Kid team up with a bounty hunter, a native princess, and a cowgirl out for justice in the hopes of taking them down once and for all. The Saints' little gang is made up of a cast of quirky criminals, each with their own traits. The first you encounter as he attempts to swindle you in a saloon card game. Things get heated and you're forced to throw down. Luckily, the wandering paragon and former deputy Doc is there to track down this trickster, Monty Spades. The other characters periodically join the protagonist throughout the story, before officially joining forces to take down the gang later in the game. It makes for a varied, beautifully paced narrative that is full of surprises, and makes use of its Wild West setting to great effect. Being the first in a planned trilogy at the time, the game has humble beginnings, but by the end, I was left in full anticipation of Part 2. While I did not expect to see the credits roll as early as they did, I found the low price of $5.99 to be just right for the amount of time I spent adventuring. The four main characters are strong, have clear motivations, and so far their stories have each played out nicely. The Native American character Moon, for instance, is trying to get to the bottom of a plot to frame her tribe for attacking a nearby village. The chief and his advisors are set in their ways, but Moon is willing to do whatever is best for the people, regardless of superstition or tradition. Doc is a former member of the Boot Hill posse that took down the Saints' little gang the first time round. He's wary of getting others involved in a mess that he feels partially responsible for, but nevertheless his sense of justice shines through. The variety and volume of characters found around the game world is quite impressive, both in terms of artistic design and dialogue to be had. Most of the NPCs look striking, and you rarely find clones of the same person around the same area like a lot of RPGs of this type. Talking to an NPC will usually result in some interesting dialogue, and sometimes even in positive status effects for the party. This meant I often found myself trying to talk to as many of these NPCs in each new area as possible, and getting really immersed in the game. Even your dog, who can be found throughout as the game's save point, has useful pointers on the task at hand, ensuring you don't lose your way. Though the standard movement speed of the characters is arduously slow, this is soon remedied when you're given your own horse which can be ridden at the push of a button. At a certain point in the game, rail travel also becomes available for the player to get around the main areas of the world. One of the unique elements of Boot Hill Heroes is its battle system, which can be played in single player or up to 4-player co-op. At first glance it may seem to outright copy Earthbound in an overly simplistic way, with each character only being able to access 4 moves at any one time. I soon learned, however, that this battle system has a much more strategic, yet fast-paced approach to combat. Timing your moves is very important, and sometimes launching an attack as soon as it's available can get you killed. The idea is to activate a stance, a defensive move, which could either evade or reduce damage right before an enemy attack. There are also more complex stances such as counter, delivering a counter attack every time the character is hit. This can be a bit cheap when certain enemies use very low damage multi-hit attacks, as the counter will count for all of them. I have trounced some bosses with this stance alone. Of course, enemies can use stances too, so the best time to go on the offensive is just after the enemies have attacked, or when their stances have ended. Learning to anticipate what the enemy will do next, and planning ahead with your own moves, is at the core of this exciting battle system, but even more depth comes with the plethora of negative status effects which can be used, such as setting an enemy on fire or putting them to sleep. You can also pause the action at any time to command all 4 characters at once, setting up a defensive wall of stances or a chain of complementary attacks. There is a job system of sorts in the game, involving different hats which when worn not only have a visual impact on the characters, but teach them new moves. A standard experience and level system is used, and double experience is earned if a battle is won without taking damage, making fights with weaker enemies less of a chore. Other equipment used is a pretty standard affair, usually focused on increasing your defense with different types of clothing. There are also those aforementioned status ailments and buffs, which are either inherent to your equipped weapon, a side effect of your offensive moves, or gained through weapon synthesis by using collected materials on your weapons. Collecting materials in this game actually manages to be a lot of fun. Things like flowers and fruit spawn periodically all over, and feathers and hides can be collected from farm animals with the right tool. And of course, materials are also dropped after battle. The player is also treated to a lovely audio cue when picking up items and opening chests, which is a treat in itself and never gets old. There are various types of shops with an increasing variety of weapons, armour and status affecting juicing food throughout the game. Materials gathered from battle are the main source of income, and with that comes even more importance to collecting materials, and an engaging trade-off between using them to upgrade your equipment or being able to afford new stuff. The enemy designs clearly take influence from the childlike drawings of Earthbound, yet still feel unique in the spaghetti western setting. I found the quality of the designs to be somewhat inconsistent, with some sprites looking far more pixelated than others. Some sprites would also bug out and disappear completely on occasion, though I believe that issue has now been fixed with a patch. When an enemy is defeated, the static sprites do a sort of paper-like falling flat animation, or sometimes do flips and fly off the screen, Smash Brothers style. I would have preferred at least some proper animation of the battle sprites, but I understand that within the budget constraints and the visual style Experimental Gamer was going for, this was not a priority. The game's soundtrack by Jake Kaufman is perfectly suited to both the spaghetti western and classic RPG themes of Boot Hill Heroes. It is composed entirely from MIDI instruments, yet still manages to evoke emotions akin to the great spaghetti western soundtracks of Ennio Morricone. The soundtrack is light-hearted, fast-paced, then epic, all when it needs to be, and each track has very memorable and catchy melodies. The main game itself comes to quite an abrupt end with a to-be-continued message leading into the next game, Boot Hill Bounties, but there is still more to discover after the game's completion, with a side quest and bonus dungeon that's harder than anything that comes before. Here you can use all 4 characters' skills to their fullest, with the complementary stances and buffs. The dungeon has various switches and chests that ask you trivia questions about the world, such as how many turtle shells are on the wall of the bar in Kickstart Creek. This side quest is a double-edged sword, however, as I feel most players will class this as frustrating busy work in comparison to the rest of the game, especially as you kick to the start of the dungeon for wrong answers. Also, whilst the story has only just got going in terms of the series, it has now crashed to a halt, so again many will simply want to switch off and move on to the next game. Other than a couple more bugs, such as the dog giving a false message saying game not saved, and a gigantic sound effect volume spike when using attacks with multiple simultaneous hits, there is barely anything negative I can say about Boot Hill Heroes. The game kept me genuinely engaged from start to finish. It brought new ideas to a genre that many may believe has had its day, and used its inspirations conservatively so as not to feel like a clone. Boot Hill Heroes goes above and beyond to prove that this classic JRPG style is truly timeless. I've been Jake of the Retro Perspective, thank you very much for watching, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.